Gravity as a guide. Imagine for a moment that you are floating in the vast expanse of space, weightless, drifting gently as the stars shimmer in the distance. Gravity, though invisible, is ever present, holding planets in their orbits and guiding the motion of everything in the universe. It is quiet, constant, and unrelenting, a force that shapes everything it touches. In many ways, gravity serves as a perfect metaphor for the unseen guides in our own lives, the principles, values, and instincts that subtly steer us toward where we need to be. Just as planets never collide or drift endlessly without the guiding pull of gravity, we too are influenced by forces that may not always be visible but are deeply felt. Floating in a vacuum is the state of being that allows us to recognize the contrast between weight and weightlessness. In this suspended stillness, without the immediate tug of gravity, every motion becomes more deliberate, every direction more intentional. When you drift freely, you understand that the absence of gravity does not mean the absence of purpose. Resistance teaches growth, and in space we see how even the slightest resistance can shape motion over time. A small push in the vacuum sends an object on a path that, while gentle, is meaningful and sustained. In life, it is often these subtle forces, the quiet moments of friction, and the gentle nudges that help us grow, helping us adjust our trajectory and find balance. Connectedness of motion is evident in the dance of celestial bodies, where every orbit is influenced by another, and the movement of one star or planet sends ripples throughout the cosmos. Just as planets and moons are connected in their orbits, our actions ripple across the lives of others even when we cannot see the impact. Every choice, every motion is connected to something larger, a chain of influence that stretches far beyond our immediate perception. Invisible forces matter, and gravity is the perfect illustration. Though unseen, its effects are undeniable, shaping motion, creating structure, and maintaining order. So too, in our own lives, the invisible forces, love, hope, intention, intuition, guide us, often without fanfare, helping us maintain direction when the path is unclear. Adaptation is natural, and in microgravity, astronauts quickly learn to adjust to new conditions, to float rather than fight the environment, to move with grace rather than against it. We, too, adapt to the shifting currents of life, learning to flow rather than resist, to understand that change does not mean chaos, but rather an opportunity to discover new ways of moving and being. Perspective expands when we float above the Earth, observing the planet as a whole, seeing borders fade and distances shrink. From this vantage point, we realize that the challenges and concerns that once seemed overwhelming are smaller than they appeared. In space, perspective is literally vast, and it teaches us that our place in the universe is meaningful, that each motion contributes to a larger pattern that is beautiful and interconnected. Purpose in the drift is perhaps the most profound lesson. Even when we feel unanchored, even when we drift without visible direction, motion is never meaningless. The gentle pull of gravity, the subtle influence of unseen forces, the connections we make, the adaptation we embrace, and the perspective we gain all contribute to a sense of purpose. Every drift, every float, every moment of stillness carries meaning, showing us that our existence, like the motion of the stars, is intentional and guided, even when we cannot see the path ahead. Floating in a vacuum. Imagine yourself suspended in the quiet stillness of space, where the familiar pull of gravity has all but disappeared, and every motion is soft, deliberate, and unhurried. In this weightless environment, you discover that floating is not aimless, but a gentle navigation through a vast, silent expanse. Gravity as a guide reminds us that even when we feel weightless, there are invisible forces at work, shaping our movement and our trajectory, guiding us in ways that are subtle yet profound. When you are floating in a vacuum, you realize that drifting does not equate to being lost. In this serene emptiness, each motion, each small adjustment carries significance. The absence of familiar anchors allows you to feel the influence of resistance, teaching growth in ways that are almost imperceptible. Even the lightest push can set you on a new path, and the smallest adaptation can change your trajectory. Resistance teaches growth. And in the vacuum, growth comes from learning to respond to gentle shifts rather than from struggling against unseen weights. You notice that connectedness of motion persists even here. Objects, planets, and stars, though separated by immense distances, still interact subtly, their motions creating patterns and rhythms that resonate across the cosmos. In our own lives, floating in a vacuum mirrors moments when we feel unanchored, disconnected from our usual support, yet our actions continue to have effect, touching others and creating subtle influence. Invisible forces matter, and the vacuum teaches us that even forces we cannot see, like gravity or the quiet currents of air or energy, shape our motion profoundly. Just as unseen influences guide every orbit and trajectory, the invisible elements in our lives, our intuition, our values, our unseen support systems, keep us moving with intention. Adaptation is natural in this state. Floating in a vacuum requires learning new ways to move, to respond, and to exist. Astronauts adapt to microgravity, finding grace in the absence of weight. And so do we when we navigate circumstances that remove familiar anchors. Perspective expands as we float in silence, with Earth far below, allowing us to see the bigger picture. Borders disappear, and the sense of separation diminishes, revealing the interconnectedness of all things. Floating in a vacuum teaches that what may feel like drifting is actually gaining insight and a broader understanding, helping us see ourselves in a larger context. Purpose in the drift becomes evident as we notice that every gentle motion, every soft rotation, and every deliberate adjustment in the vacuum is meaningful. Even when the environment removes traditional markers of direction, we are never truly lost. Floating becomes a metaphor for life's quiet moments, where progress may be invisible, but every action contributes to an unfolding path. Floating in a vacuum is not emptiness. It is an opportunity to move freely, to feel subtle guidance, to respond to invisible forces, to adapt with ease, and to expand perspective. It teaches that even in moments of weightlessness, purpose persists, and every motion, no matter how slight, resonates in ways that shape the journey ahead, demonstrating that floating is itself an expression of life's quiet, intentional guidance. Resistance teaches growth. Imagine floating in the quiet vastness of space, where every motion is subtle and every adjustment carries weight in ways that are barely perceptible. In this serene emptiness, the presence and absence of forces reveal truths about movement, effort, and adaptation. Gravity as a guide, though faint, is still at work, influencing every subtle drift, reminding us that even when we feel free from familiar anchors, guidance is never truly absent. Floating in a vacuum without the familiar tug of gravity allows the tiniest resistance to become visible. You notice that each push, each slight adjustment sends ripples through your path, creating new trajectories that were invisible before. In these moments, growth emerges not from ease, but from the gentle negotiation with subtle forces that shape movement in ways we cannot immediately see. Connectedness of motion becomes evident as resistance highlights interaction. Even in an environment that seems isolated, each motion interacts with the surrounding space, creating a rhythm and connection that mirrors how our own actions ripple through the lives of others. When you push gently against an invisible current, the response of the space around you is immediate yet understated, reminding us that no effort is ever wasted and that even small actions contribute to larger patterns. Invisible forces matter, and resistance demonstrates their quiet, persistent presence. Though you may not see gravity, friction, or air in the vacuum, each exerts influence, shaping your path in ways that cannot be ignored. Similarly, in life, unseen influences, the support of others, the persistence of intention, the quiet strength within, guide us, often teaching more profoundly than the forces we can directly perceive. Adaptation is natural when encountering resistance, and in microgravity, astronauts learn to adjust constantly, to move with care, to engage with subtle pushes rather than struggle against them. In life, growth comes from similar adaptation, from noticing when movement meets resistance, and from responding with patience, grace, and intention. Perspective expands as resistance becomes a teacher. In the quiet of space, the contrast between ease and challenge allows for reflection. You see how every subtle force has purpose, how every gentle friction shapes motion, and how every adjustment contributes to the broader pattern of movement. Understanding resistance in this way expands your perspective, helping you recognize that obstacles are not merely interruptions, but essential guides that help you navigate your path more skillfully. Purpose in the drift is illuminated through resistance, revealing that growth is intertwined with the subtle challenges we encounter. Floating may feel effortless, yet the presence of even the smallest resistance demonstrates that each motion is significant, each adjustment meaningful, and every moment of adaptation contributes to a purposeful journey. Resistance teaches growth by revealing the ways in which effort, attention, and adaptation shape the path forward. Floating in a vacuum, you become acutely aware of the delicate interplay of forces, the unseen guidance of gravity, and the ways in which subtle friction and opposition are necessary for motion to be directed and intentional. Connectedness of motion emerges again as you realize that even the smallest resistance affects more than just your immediate path, echoing through the surroundings, influencing objects, trajectories, and rhythms in ways that remind you of the profound interconnectedness of all motion. Gravity as a guide, floating in a vacuum, connectedness of motion, invisible forces matter. Adaptation is natural, perspective expands, and purpose in the drift all converge in the experience of resistance, showing that growth is inseparable from the gentle challenges that teach awareness, patience, and intentional movement. Connectedness of motion. Imagine drifting silently through the endless expanse of space, where every planet, star, and particle moves in a delicate rhythm, influenced by forces both seen and unseen. Gravity as a guide gently tugs at celestial bodies, creating orbits and flows that are precise, yet almost imperceptible, reminding us that even in vast emptiness, direction exists. Floating in a vacuum allows us to perceive motion in its purest form, where even the smallest drift or rotation carries consequences beyond the immediate moment. In space, motion is never isolated. Each movement, however subtle, interacts with the environment and with other objects, demonstrating that connectedness is an intrinsic quality of existence. Resistance teaches growth, and the interaction of forces shows that every push and pull, every minor adjustment, contributes to the ongoing dance of motion. Growth occurs when we recognize that nothing moves entirely alone, that our actions, like the motions of planets and satellites, send ripples across space, affecting trajectories and patterns far beyond our immediate perception. Invisible forces matter profoundly in this context, because the motion of objects in space is governed by forces that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Gravity, inertia, and momentum all work together to maintain equilibrium, and the slightest disturbance can shift paths, reminding us that unseen influences guide all motion, connecting everything in subtle yet meaningful ways. Adaptation is natural as we observe these interactions. Floating bodies in a vacuum adjust naturally to the influence of surrounding forces, finding balance and harmony without resistance. In life, this mirrors our ability to respond to external influences, to adapt to circumstances beyond our control, and to move with grace in a world where every action is linked to another. Perspective expands, when we witness the vast network of movement in the cosmos, revealing patterns that are invisible from a limited viewpoint. The interconnected motion of celestial bodies teaches us that nothing is truly isolated, that our choices and actions exist within a web of influence and resonance. Understanding connectedness in this way encourages us to see beyond ourselves, to recognize the ripple effects of our decisions, and to appreciate the subtle ways in which we are part of something much larger than our immediate experience. Purpose in the drift becomes evident as we float through space and observe how every motion, every rotation, every orbit is part of an intricate, ongoing pattern. Even when a single object appears to drift aimlessly, it is engaged in a larger system, connected in ways that give meaning to its movement. Connectedness of motion shows us that we, too, are never truly isolated. Our lives, our choices, and our efforts are interwoven with the world around us, influencing and being influenced, creating patterns that extend beyond what we can see or imagine. Gravity as a guide reminds us that even invisible forces shape these connections, providing direction and cohesion. Floating in a vacuum highlights the beauty of movement unencumbered by weight, yet fully engaged with the subtle interactions around it. Resistance teaches growth by showing us that adaptation to forces, whether small or large, is essential to maintain balance within the interconnected system. Invisible forces matter because they are the thread that ties every motion together, linking one action to another in a seamless, ongoing flow. Adaptation is natural as objects, life forms, and even thoughts respond to these forces, adjusting paths and rhythms in ways that maintain harmony. Perspective expands. When we understand that connectedness is not just a concept, but a lived experience, visible in the dance of planets, stars, and cosmic dust, and reflected in our own lives through relationships, choices, and unseen influences. Purpose in the drift reveals that connectedness gives meaning to motion, showing that even in apparent aimlessness, every action is part of a larger, intricate design, reminding us that we exist within a web of influence, guidance, adaptation, and growth. Invisible forces matter. Imagine floating gently in the vast silence of space, where the absence of visible support magnifies the presence of unseen influences. Gravity as a guide is one such force, subtle yet constant, shaping every trajectory, every orbit, and every motion without ever being directly seen. Floating in a vacuum, you begin to feel the effect of forces that are imperceptible to the eye, yet undeniable in their impact. Even the faintest push or pull alters your path, teaching that what is invisible can be more powerful than what is obvious. Resistance teaches growth, and the presence of these invisible forces allows movement to become meaningful. Each gentle tug or subtle shift challenges adaptation, requiring responsiveness and patience, revealing that growth often comes not from what is visible, but from what quietly shapes the motion of everything around us. Connectedness of motion becomes clearer when we acknowledge that every invisible force links objects, people, and actions in ways that are often imperceptible. Just as gravity connects the planets, guiding them in elegant orbits, the unseen currents of energy, intention, and influence connect us to each other, to our environment, and to the unfolding of events. Adaptation is natural when invisible forces are recognized. Floating in a vacuum, astronauts learn to respond to the delicate balance of gravitational pulls, momentum, and inertia. Similarly, in life, we adapt to unseen influences, intuition, support, and circumstances, allowing us to navigate challenges smoothly, to move with grace, and to align ourselves with the subtle currents that shape our experience. Perspective expands as we understand that the world is not only what is visible, but largely what is invisible. From space, Earth appears serene and unified, yet beneath the surface, countless forces interact to maintain harmony, demonstrating that the unseen framework is as important as what we can observe. Purpose in the drift becomes evident as invisible forces provide context, direction, and meaning to motion that may otherwise seem aimless. Floating without the awareness of these forces would feel chaotic. Yet understanding their presence allows us to move intentionally, to respond wisely, and to trust that even unseen factors are guiding us toward growth. Gravity as a guide, floating in a vacuum. Resistance teaches growth, connectedness of motion. Adaptation is natural, perspective expands, and purpose in the drift all converge in the experience of invisible forces. They remind us that life is shaped not only by what is immediate and tangible, but also by what we cannot directly perceive. Each silent influence, every imperceptible pull, plays a role in maintaining balance, orchestrating motion, and creating connection. In the vacuum of space, the power of invisible forces becomes undeniable. They govern motion, ensure stability, and create harmony among distant objects. Floating in this environment teaches that unseen influences are essential for growth, for maintaining connections, and for navigating challenges. Resistance teaches growth as we learn to work with these subtle forces rather than against them, finding strength in alignment rather than conflict. Connectedness of motion becomes evident when we see that every invisible force links not only objects but experiences, events, and outcomes in ways that are intricately coordinated. Adaptation is natural because recognition of invisible forces allows us to move fluidly, responding to shifts with awareness and precision. Perspective expands as we realize that life is not just the sum of visible events, but also the interplay of hidden currents that guide us, shape us, and create opportunity. Purpose in the drift is illuminated by the quiet presence of invisible forces, showing that even when nothing is immediately apparent, the unseen guides, supports, and directs us toward growth, connection, and meaningful motion. Adaptation is natural. Imagine floating gently through the quiet expanse of space, where every movement requires careful adjustment and every motion interacts subtly with unseen forces. Gravity as a guide continues to shape your path, providing direction even when it feels distant, reminding you that guidance often exists quietly in ways that are not immediately obvious. Floating in a vacuum magnifies the need for adaptation, as familiar anchors are absent and the usual feedback of weight and friction disappears. Each movement requires gentle recalibration, a soft awareness of the forces at play, and a willingness to adjust. Resistance teaches growth in this environment as adaptation is not passive but active. Every slight push, every minor correction in trajectory engages with the forces surrounding you, teaching balance, patience, and responsiveness. In life, adaptation is similar. Challenges, unexpected changes, and subtle shifts require adjustment, and through these responses, growth becomes possible. Connectedness of motion reminds us that adaptation is not only about the individual, but also about interaction. Every adjustment affects more than just your immediate path, creating ripples that influence the surrounding space. In microgravity, astronauts must adapt not only to their own motions, but also to the motions of objects, tools, and companions, reflecting the interconnected nature of existence. Invisible forces matter in the process of adaptation, as these subtle influences guide how movement unfolds. Recognition of these forces, whether they are gravitational pulls, inertia, or currents in the environment, allows for smoother adjustment and demonstrates that responsiveness to unseen elements is essential for maintaining equilibrium. Perspective expands. When we realize that adaptation is a natural part of navigating life and space alike. Observing the vastness of the cosmos, we understand that flexibility, openness, and responsiveness are not signs of weakness, but evidence of harmony with the larger system. Purpose in the drift becomes apparent when we notice that each adaptation, each recalibration, is meaningful. Floating may seem effortless, yet every adjustment contributes to a deliberate, intentional path, showing that we are always moving toward balance, understanding, and integration. Gravity as a guide, floating in a vacuum. Resistance teaches growth, connectedness of motion, invisible forces matter, perspective expands, and purpose in the drift all converge in the experience of adaptation. It is through natural adjustment that we navigate challenges, engage with the invisible forces around us, and respond to subtle resistance, all while maintaining our connection to the larger system. Adaptation is natural, and in space, this becomes visible in the grace of motion, the gentle corrections to trajectory, and the responsiveness to every slight shift in the environment. Floating in a vacuum emphasizes the importance of being present and aware, as the absence of familiar feedback heightens sensitivity to the tiniest influences. Resistance teaches growth by requiring that each adaptation is intentional, thoughtful, and precise, revealing that challenges are essential teachers. Connectedness of motion reminds us that no adaptation occurs in isolation, as the adjustments we make interact with and influence the motions of everything around us. Invisible forces matter, because adaptation requires acknowledgement and engagement with the subtle, often unseen influences that shape movement, trajectory, and balance. Perspective expands, as we see that adaptation is a form of alignment with the larger patterns of existence, demonstrating harmony rather than struggle. Purpose in the drift is expressed through each natural adjustment, showing that flexibility, responsiveness, and awareness are integral to meaningful motion, growth, and connection. Perspective expands. Imagine drifting slowly through the infinite expanse of space, where the earth below appears as a serene, delicate sphere, and the vastness around you stretches endlessly in all directions. Gravity as a guide continues to provide subtle direction, keeping planets in orbit and reminding us that even when we float seemingly without control, there is structure and purpose. Floating in a vacuum allows us to perceive movement from a vantage point, free from familiar anchors, revealing the bigger picture and helping us see patterns that are otherwise obscured by proximity. Resistance teaches growth, as we observe how small challenges and subtle forces shape the motion of celestial bodies, demonstrating that perspective is often gained by stepping back and noticing the effects of these interactions. Connectedness of motion becomes apparent as we see how every orbit, rotation, and drift is linked to another, forming a web of influence and interaction that is both intricate and beautiful. Invisible forces matter in this expansion of perspective because it is often what we cannot see: the quiet pull of gravity, the unseen currents, the subtle tugs of other objects that defines the broader context. By acknowledging these invisible forces, we understand that the world is larger, more connected, and more nuanced than it might appear from a limited point of view. Adaptation is natural in the face of expanding perspective. As we float and observe, we adjust our awareness, our expectations, and our sense of scale, recognizing that the challenges we encounter are part of a larger system, and that learning to adapt to this broader context is essential for navigating life with ease and understanding. Purpose in the drift becomes clearer when perspective expands, as we begin to see that even seemingly aimless motion contributes to the intricate pattern of existence. Floating through space, we realize that our individual paths, though small against the enormity of the cosmos, are meaningful, connected, and intentional. Gravity as a guide, floating in a vacuum. Resistance teaches growth, connectedness of motion. Invisible forces matter. Adaptation is natural. And purpose in the drift all converge in the experience of expanded perspective. From this higher vantage point, challenges appear smaller, actions become more deliberate, and connections with others and with the world are more visible. Perspective expands, as we notice that life is not just the immediate moments we experience, but a vast network of interactions, influences, and outcomes that extend beyond our direct perception. Floating in a vacuum emphasizes this clarity, showing how being unanchored can provide the opportunity to see the interconnections that structure motion, and life alike. Resistance teaches growth, because the subtle challenges and obstacles we encounter help refine our understanding of the larger system, revealing how our actions influence and are influenced by the surrounding environment. Connectedness of motion becomes strikingly clear as we see the patterns of interaction, how one small movement can ripple outward and affect the trajectory of others, demonstrating the profound interdependence inherent in existence. Invisible forces matter in this expanded view, reminding us that unseen influences, whether gravitational, emotional, or relational, shape the broader context and guide us in ways that are essential to understand. Adaptation is natural as we learn to adjust to this larger perspective, finding harmony with the currents of influence and responding to them with awareness and intention. Purpose in the drift is revealed through perspective, showing that even moments that seem isolated, insignificant, or unmoored are part of a greater pattern, and that understanding the wider view allows us to navigate life with insight, intention, and quiet confidence. Purpose in the drift. Imagine floating gently through the quiet expanse of space, where motion seems effortless, yet every trajectory carries meaning, and every drift contributes to a larger cosmic pattern. Gravity as a guide continues to shape the paths of planets and stars, reminding us that even when we feel unanchored, subtle forces direct our motion and provide structure to our journey. Floating in a vacuum amplifies this realization, as the absence of familiar anchors allows us to notice the flow of movement more clearly, to sense the intentionality behind even the smallest shifts and adjustments. Resistance teaches growth, and through the gentle challenges encountered while drifting, we learn that purpose is often discovered in the subtle negotiations between effort and ease. Each slight push, each careful adjustment in motion contributes to understanding, to alignment, and to the unfolding of potential. Connectedness of motion is evident as we see that our movements, though seemingly isolated, interact with the surrounding environment, influencing trajectories, rhythms, and patterns far beyond our immediate perception. Nothing exists in complete isolation, and the realization of this interconnectedness enhances the sense that our drifting has significance, that even small motions ripple outward and create effect. Invisible forces matter profoundly in shaping purpose, as the unseen currents, tugs, and pulls guide our path in ways that are often imperceptible yet essential. A soft gravitational influence, a subtle energy, or an intuitive nudge can all direct our course, showing that purpose does not always announce itself loudly, but is revealed through gentle alignment with these forces. Adaptation is natural as we navigate this drifting state, adjusting to the subtleties of motion, responding to the environment, and learning to flow with the gentle forces that shape our trajectory. Floating in a vacuum teaches that even when weight and resistance are minimal, adaptation ensures that movement is intentional, balanced, and meaningful. Perspective expands as we recognize that our drift is part of a much larger system, that each motion contributes to a broader pattern, and that the purpose of our journey is not always immediate or visible, but exists in the cumulative effect of our alignment, adaptation, and interaction with forces around us. Purpose in the drift becomes increasingly apparent when we understand that no motion is wasted, no path insignificant, and that even apparent aimlessness contributes to growth, connection, and understanding. Gravity as a guide, floating in a vacuum, resistance teaches growth, connectedness of motion. Invisible forces matter, adaptation is natural, and perspective expands all converge in the realization of purpose. Every gentle push, every careful adjustment, and every response to invisible forces serves a role in a larger orchestration of movement, showing that our existence, like the motion of celestial bodies, is guided, interconnected, and meaningful. Floating in a vacuum allows us to experience this directly, to feel the significance of motion without the distractions of weight or immediate demands. and to understand that the drifting state itself is not a void, but a space in which alignment, observation, and intentionality reveal purpose. Resistance teaches growth as we navigate subtle challenges, adapting to circumstances that shift unexpectedly and learning that every adjustment contributes to direction and meaning. Connectedness of motion emphasizes that purpose is never isolated, as our movements interact with and influence the broader system, creating effects that resonate far beyond what is immediately visible. Invisible forces matter because they provide subtle guidance, support, and correction, helping to ensure that every drift is purposeful, that every motion aligns with a larger design. Adaptation is natural as we learn to move with awareness, responding to these forces with grace and attentiveness, allowing purpose to emerge through our alignment and our actions. Perspective expands, showing that the significance of our drift becomes clearer when we see it in context. When we recognize how each motion contributes to the broader pattern, and when we understand that purpose exists even when it is not immediately apparent.